You grew up thinking rich looked like something: a certain car, a certain zip code, a vacation that needs a photographer. But wealth that actually lasts doesn't announce itself. It looks like a Thursday night with nothing happening. A transfer that cleared this morning, you've already forgotten about. A regular life from every angle. And the first thing that separates the people quietly building it from everyone else has nothing to do with how much they make. Sign 1. There's a gap between what you earn and what you spend. You get the raise email on a Tuesday. 3%, effective next month. That's $1,860 more a year, about $112 a month after taxes. Your coworker gets the same email and already knows what to do with his. Move to a nicer apartment, closer to downtown. You don't. Not because you can't, because you've done that math before and you know how it ends. The nicer place becomes the baseline. The baseline becomes the minimum. 2 years later, you're making more than ever and wondering why nothing's accumulating. So you do something quiet instead. 11 minutes, no one's approval needed. You log in, find the automatic transfer you set up months ago, and bump it up by $80 a month into an account with a boring name so you'll leave it alone. Nobody notices. That's the point. The average American saves less than 5 cents of every dollar earned. Spending quietly expands to fill whatever space a paycheck creates. You're saving closer to 14, not through willpower, but by not moving when everyone else moves and treating every raise as something to redirect before it becomes a new normal. Sign 2. A $1,000 emergency doesn't scare you anymore. The mechanic calls Wednesday morning. $847. 2 years ago, that call meant sitting in a parking garage doing math with your eyes closed. Which card had room? Whether you could split the payment. Now you finish your email, pick up the car after work, tap your card, and move on. By the time you're home, it hasn't crossed your mind again. Nearly half of Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency from savings. Not from irresponsibility, but because the gap between income and spending never got wide enough to leave anything behind. Without a buffer, a surprise expense doesn't stay $847. It becomes $847 plus interest, plus a decision made under pressure. You have 3 months of expenses saved, sitting quietly in an account you barely check. It's not supposed to excite you. It's supposed to absorb the shock without drama, the way a good shock absorber does its job and you never notice it working. Sign 3. You said no to something you could actually afford. A friend's bachelorette trip lands in the group chat. $1,400 for flights, hotel, dinners. You have the money. That's not the question anymore. The question is, what else that $1,400 could do, and which answer you can actually live with. The pressure isn't coming from your friend. It's ambient. It's the assumption that if you have the money, you spend it, the same way lifestyle has always expanded to meet income, almost automatically, like a tide following the moon. What's changed is the pause, a beat between wanting something and acting on it that didn't used to exist. For this trip, the answer doesn't come clean, so you send a kind text, bow out, and move the $400 you would have spent toward your Roth IRA instead. No one congratulates you. Nothing marks the moment, but you made it. Wages are up about 3.5% over the past year, and for most people, that extra room gets filled immediately. A nicer version of the same life. The pause is what breaks the pattern. Sign 4, your money is working while you sleep. 14 months ago, on a quiet Sunday, you opened a brokerage account and set up an automatic transfer. $500 a month into a low-cost index fund. You didn't tell anyone. There was nothing to tell. Since then, you've put in $7,000, but the balance is higher than $7,000. The difference is the part you didn't contribute. That's compounding, working in the background whether you're paying attention or not. When the market dropped 6% in a week, you didn't check twice. You just let the automatic transfer go through like always. A coworker sold in the panic and bought back in 2 months later at a higher price than he sold. He doesn't bring it up anymore. The S&P 500 has averaged roughly 10% a year for nearly a century. Nobody can promise it continues. But the math is simple. $500 a month for 20 years at a conservative 7% comes to roughly $260,000. At the historical average, closer to $340,000 to $380,000. You'll have contributed $120,000 of that. The rest is time, doing the work you refuse to interrupt. Sign 5, you've stopped measuring your life in money. A job offer comes through. $11,000 more a year, a bigger title, a 90-minute commute each way. 3 years ago, that number would have ended the conversation. Now you sit with it overnight, and by Friday, you turn it down. Not dramatically, just a polite email and a second cup of coffee. Somewhere in the last couple of years, you stopped measuring income in and started measuring hours out. 3 hours a day on a train aren't free. They have a price, and you finally started charging for them. You pay someone to clean your apartment twice a month. A friend calls it wasteful. He'd rather save the money and lose the Sunday. You know exactly what those 3 hours are worth to you, and it isn't $130. The median net worth for Americans in their mid-30s sits around $135,000. You're not there by the numbers yet, but you're tracking differently because you've stopped treating your hours as something to sell and started treating them as something to protect. Sign 6. Your net worth is growing even when you don't feel it. On a quiet Sunday morning, you open a spreadsheet you haven't touched since October and start entering numbers. Checking savings, brokerage, 401k minus what's left on the car loan. You do the subtraction. Compared to October, you're up $18,400. No windfall, no lucky month. Just the same quiet decisions repeated for 4 months, and the number moved anyway. About half of Americans couldn't tell you their net worth, not because they don't care, but because nobody taught them to look, and because early on, the number feels too small to take seriously. But a number that's growing, tracked consistently, stops being abstract. It becomes evidence that the gap was real, that the buffer did its job, that every pause before a purchase actually added up to something measurable. The transfer that went through on the first, the repair bill that didn't spiral, the trip you didn't take, the offer you turned down. All of it is sitting quietly in one line at the bottom of a spreadsheet. None of this felt like progress while it was happening. Each decision felt small, ordinary, forgettable. That's exactly what it was. That's exactly what it is. This week, something routine will happen, a purchase will almost happen, and then won't. Notice that pause? That's where everything is actually decided, not in the big moves, in that second. At what point does the life you're quietly building become the life you're actually living?